Greetings, chess fans. My name is Arturs Neiksans. I'm the leading Latvian chess grandmaster, and I would like to have a look at what happened in the second game of the World Championship match between the world champion Liren against his challenger Dommaraju Gukesh. It's being played in Singapore, and today they fought in the second game. So, as many of you are probably aware, yesterday was the very first game where Liren surprised many chess fans all over the world, scoring a victory with the black color in the French defense. So that's why everybody was so curious what's going to happen today. Is Ding going to capitalize on the white color, or instead he's going to play something more positional? So let's start with the first move, which already is a small surprise, e4, because Ding is mainly a big d4 player, and you would expect that for the World Championship match he has prepared something deep. Even though in one of the pre-tournament or pre-match interviews he did reveal that he has essentially prepared for the match only 3 weeks, I'm not really sure that's the case, but either way, he played e4, and here another small surprise by Gukesh. He responded with e4, e5. Now, Gukesh mainly plays Sicilian defense, but of course, when you are playing in a match, very often the players follow the strategy. With the white color, you try to play for the win. With the black color, you try to play for a draw. And even though if Gukesh is now trailing in the match by 1 point, I don't think it's a good moment to start to burn bridges and go for a super sharp fight. So his choice to play e4, e5, symmetrical position makes perfect sense because he will still get more games of the white color. Out of knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. My only guess is that Ding and his team probably saw something in Gukesh's opening prep, and they tried to trick the young player by forcing him into perhaps unfamiliar nuances of the Italian game, which, by the way, I recently made a bootcamp about, so if you're interested you can check it out after the video ends. So I talk about 2 hours about all the ideas of the Italian game, which is going to be relevant in this recap, because now after bishop c5 here in the bootcamp I recommend to play short castle, and typically ideas to play c3 d4, or most common c3 d3 knight e2 knight f1 and knight g3. So d3, now this is a bit odd move order, but you're going to see the idea in a moment, because after knight f6, here the world champion played knight c3. Now for most of you, this might seem like a normal move, but when I saw this move, my first impression was, you're not supposed to play the Italian game like this. Why is this? Because essentially white loses the opportunity to play c3, d4 and 5 for the center, and because of this, white has less options to react whatever happens in the center, right? But I think that knight c3 is a slightly standalone idea, because the big idea is to play knight a4 in some lines, try to get a bishop on c5, or also consider knight e5. So let me just show you some sample lines. So here Gukesh played a6, which is perfectly understandable move, but let's say he will play d6. So the first thing he needs to watch out is knight a4. Now that's the big idea of this knight c3. The point is, if black plays something like bishop b6, white can trade it here. Now watch out for knight a5, play a3, and even if black manages to trade the bishop here, now in this position I think that white has a small edge, and I think this is what Ding was aiming for, have the bishop, then slightly better pawn structure, and many black's pawns are positioned on the color of this bishop. So this probably means basically any endgame is going to be slightly better for white. Also, another option here for black would be play after knight c3. Let's say black would play short castle. You always need to watch out for bishop g5. And then after h6, bishop h4, again g5. Do you really want to do this? After g5, you want to make sure there's no sacrifice. This pin could be annoying. After bishop e7, think about some creative ideas, like long castle, f4, whatever. So it looks very interesting. So knight c3 does have some ideas. Here Gukesh responded with a6, anticipating knight a4 with bishop h7, and I think overall this was a part of Ding's pre-match strategy, because Gukesh is widely regarded as a guy who calculates variations really well. And I think that Ding simply aims for those quiet positions that he understands a bit better, and he can grind out this small plus and maybe make his young opponent to be nervous or impatient. So, as there is a very famous saying in the Russian language, with youngsters you go to an endgame. So here a4 was played by Ding. I suppose the idea was to stop any knight a5 ideas. By the way, a4 idea in the classical c3 knight e2 Italian game is a very modern trend, because not only white secures the last square bishop, but also is fighting for the space advantage, the queen side, which is a very modern way to play. So here d6 was played by Gukesh, and now show castle. So I think this is a provocation from Ding, because bishop g4 feels to be like a very tempting move, threatening to play knight e4, etc. But obviously, anybody who has studied Italian game, they know that the last square bishop has no business on this diagonal, because the point is after bishop h5, it seems that this knight e4 is very tempting. If white deals with this threat, like with moves like bishop e3 or knight e5, essentially this last square bishop on h5 might be shut from the game. For example, check this out. Knight e4, you play g4, I think it was... just a second, I forgot the line here. Yeah, I think it was g4, and now the point is that there's no knight x on g4 because of knight x on d4. Yeah, and the point here is, for example, you play g4, black goes here, knight f6, queen f6, knight e4, bishop d4, etc, etc, etc. But at the end of the day, this bishop on g6 is simply disconnected from the game. So that's why this bishop g4 was a provocation. Maybe it was also part of Ding's prep for the match. I highly doubt that Gukesh wouldn't know this, but still, it was maybe worth a try. So Gukesh played h6, which again makes perfect sense, because if he now castles short, well, I could play bishop g5, h6 and bishop h4. And now the difference with the c3 and knight e2 ideas is that now g5 looks incredibly risky, because knight x on g5 and bishop takes on g5, this knight can directly participate in the attack with knight e5. I mean, maybe black can play bishop e6 and somehow deal with this problem, but this could be really, really scary like this, and takes, and queen f3 and f4. So I also have noticed one thing, that most of the players who are playing the Italian game from the black's perspective, they tend to include h6 just to be sure, so that this bishop g5, bishop h4 and g5 is not causing them any issues. And again, in case you're wondering why black should play g5, well, the thing is, otherwise it's very difficult to get rid of this pin. Yeah, so white wants to play knight e5, and g5 basically is the only way how you can get rid of it, because knight e7 simply ruins your king's pawn structure beyond recognition. So here, that's why Gukesh played h6. Bishop e3. Now, I think, again, this was part of the prep, but to be honest, I was not super impressed, because I think that it's going to be very difficult for Ding to beat somebody as good as Gukesh in such a total, quiet, boring Italian game. So his idea is that after bishop takes on e3, f takes on e3, I think these positions are still quite harmless, but I mean, this semi-open file might give white some ideas. Like, let's say black continues with bishop e6, aiming for complete symmetricality, white can play knight e5. So there's an idea like this, and the point is after bishop d5, e takes on d5, knight e7, e4, knight g6, black is very solid, but now white has some ideas like knight h4, and it's not so clear anymore, because let's say if you take on d5 here, now white suddenly gets to develop the kingside initiative, queen h5, show castle, and rook f3, this bishop gets very active, the other rook comes to f1, so it's not really so clear. So I'm pretty sure Ding here had a lot of ideas. So Gukesh responded with bishop e6, he was very cautious. Now this is actually pretty interesting, because he was inviting Ding to double ruin his pawn structure. Meaning bishop takes on e6, bishop takes on c5, he was happy to enter this position. Well, this is also fully supported by the engines. If you ask me, all I see is weaknesses. I mean, I see double pawns here, double pawns there, but when we think about this position a bit deeper, I think it's also quite important to think about from the perspective where lies the pawn play for white. Meaning you're using the pawn play very often to generate the targets. And if you have no pawn play, your pawns are static. It's going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to make any progress. So basically any pawn play is something like f4 or c3, d4, which would simply undouble black's pawns. So Gukesh's idea was pretty understandable that he went for this choice. So Ding decided not to enter this and he played a5 instead. So this was interesting. So he basically said, I'm happy to play exactly the same idea that you proposed to me. So what happened here? Gukesh decided to take on c4, d takes on c4, and now he did not take on e3. Because again, bishop takes on e3, f takes on e3 would get the same position that Gukesh was inviting Ding to go. But I mean, still, I have a hard time to believe that here black would have any real problems. Like, for example, black could just play short castle and use an idea from the Ra Lopez to improve the knight on c6 because it's not doing anything. So, for example, here white could go something like queen e1, maybe go for a king set attack, knight b8, an idea from the Breyer, knight h4, knight e7, I don't know, queen g3 maybe, king h7, maybe knight f5 or rook f3. It's really hard to say, but still you get the impression that white has this temporary initiative, but if black will be able to hold off white's initiative, black will be simply having a better endgame because these weaknesses are going nowhere. Well, still, Gukesh felt that this is a risky business and he decided not to pursue it and he played a short castle, which I felt maybe was a minor inaccuracy. Because now in some lines, this pawn on c5 can become problematic. So we're talking about ideas like knight e1, knight e3, or maybe knight a4. But again, the problem for white is that the pawn on a5 always is a weakness. I mean, it's really double-edged. Without a pawn on a4, black will be able to secure the pawn on c5 with the b6. With a pawn on a5, now b6 is less likely to happen because there's going to be a trade on knight e5. So it's a very interesting middle game. So what happened here, queens very quickly disappeared from the board after rook d8, and here Ding spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how does he get to the pawn on c5. So I'm pretty sure he was looking at the ideas here. Okay, here he played rook c1 to avoid a rook takes on d1 and knight a5, but he was looking also at most like knight e1, I'm pretty sure. Because the point here is that after rook d1, black collects the pawn on a5, but white is suddenly very active with knight e3, hitting these pawns. So let's say black will play something like knight e7, white plays knight e5, white is just incredibly active. Yeah, this pawn is now in trouble. So let's say c6, a knight e7, king goes somewhere, knight b2, now the knight is in trouble. This is actually a pretty challenging line, but you feel that the knight on a5 is like disconnected from the game. But again, all of this maybe is completely irrelevant, because after knight e3 here, I'm pretty sure the Ding saw that Gukesh can just give up the pawn. Like rook d8, and let's say you take the pawn on c5, rook d1, knight e1, king f8. I just do not believe that this endgame is even possible to win. Black is going to play here, knight e7. All I see is double pawns for white, so black has a chance to exploit this in an endgame, so no, you can't really do this. So Ding was looking for the opportunity to play knight e1, knight e3, and knight a4. He just could not figure it out. For example, if he plays knight e5, it drops the pawn on e4. So what he did, he put the rook on c1 and played this awkward move knight e1. Now it might seem to you that the knight on d4 is actually a very strong piece, but the pawn on c5 is constantly weak. So Ding's idea is to play king f1 and knight a4 and remind black about this weakness on c5. So rook d6 was played, g6 was played, hinting at future ideas like f5. And a couple of moves later, I think here, this was basically resignation of ideas for Ding, because he was like, okay, I don't see how I can carry out my idea, because knight e3 jumps under knight b3. Yeah, you cannot do that. The knight on g3 loses support. Knight a4 drops the pawn on e4. You cannot do that. And if you play something like f3, now black has specifically for this reason played g6 to play f5. So think about knight e7 and f5. And now suddenly this knight a4 even makes no sense, because the pawn on c5 is protected and black does have the strong knight on d4. So here Ding spent about half an hour. He decided, okay, whatever, I don't see how to continue. He played f3 here, king f2, h5, and now this was basically a draw offer. knight e2, knight c3. The point is black cannot really continue because rook takes on d1, knight takes on d1. If black takes on a5 here, white can just collect it. Here, rook takes on d1, rook takes on c5. Black has some weaknesses, so I don't see why Gukesh would want to do that. Essentially, none of the players found any way to make a progress, and the draw was agreed. So what can I say about this game? I think that Ding has to change, at least this strategy. So I think this was the plan, at least for one game. Try to get his young opponent in a simple position where he can outsmart him, and based on some small nuances, get a slightly better position. But to be honest, playing like this, the Italian game with knight c3, trading both bishops and having some double pawns for some future kingside attack, which might not even work, I think that he could do better, to be honest. So I'm not very impressed, but again, I understand the strategy. So I think for one game, it definitely was working, and I would be really surprised that Liren would repeat it in the next game with the white color, because clearly now also Gukesh's team, they have information that Ding is playing e4. He has definitely explored the Italian game, so right now they're double checking at the triple speed what to play against the Italian game. Well, of course, the beauty about the Italian game is that you can improvise it with many move orders, but I'm pretty sure that this knight c3 was meant to be like a one game surprise, and it just quite didn't work. Either way, the second game is over. Liren keeps the lead in the match, 1.5 against half a point. The winner of the match will be crowned whoever gets first to 7.5 points, so we have still many games. So dear viewers, if you have some thoughts about the game, did you like the game, or you felt that one of the players could have done something better? Write your thoughts. I'm really curious to see what you're thinking about it. And of course, if you like my recap and you would like to see more, please do not forget to press like and subscribe to my channel, as I'll be making daily recaps every day from the World Championship. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.